Looking for something to read? Well, these are the books that I've written. Hop on down to the description to find the Amazon links for all 4 of them, and keep your eyes open for more in the future. With that said, on to the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, although you may know me better as that one guy who doesn't like Shin Godzilla. I've spoken at length in the past about the many reasons why Shin Godzilla is not a masterpiece, but after a series of lengthy dissertations on that topic, I decided that I was done talking about it, at least for a while. Well, according to all the clocks in my house, it has been exactly a while since I made that proclamation. And in that time, I've decided there's another major topic that's worth tackling. I've spoken about how the movie functions on its own merits and how it functions as compared to the 2014 American film. After that particular video, I saw a lot of people arguing that a comparison between these two movies is not a good one to make, since they are so different from each other, and if Shin must be compared to anything, it should be to the original 1954 film. Surely, by putting it side by side with its proper predecessor, true perspective will be attained and detractors such as myself will understand that Anno's remake really is equal, if not superior, to Honda's classic. I've seen a lot of people make this claim, but I've seen no one really elaborate on it. The way it usually goes is that you make a generalized statement about the original, apply that same generalization to Shin, and then you never bring up the original film again unless doing so serves the purpose of bolstering Shin as an immutable piece of art immune to criticism. Maybe I just missed it, but I haven't seen anyone do a proper in-depth comparison of Shin Godzilla against the original Godzilla. So alright. If people want Anno's movie compared to the original, let's do it. Let's put these two movies side by side to see how they stack up against each other and which one comes out looking better. I can already see a problem with the presentation here. How are you going to distinguish between the two movies? You can't say King of the Monsters anymore without specifying dates, not to mention you need to distinguish between Godzilla the Monster and Godzilla the movie. Good point, Snazzy. Okay, here's how we'll do things. For the remainder of this video and its successors, the 1954 film will be referred to as Gojira, the 2016 film will be referred to as Shin, and the monster will be called Godzilla in either case. That should prevent any confusion and prevent my analysis from being even wordier than it already is. Again, just to make sure we're all clear, the 1954 film is Gojira, the 2016 film is Shin, and the monster is Godzilla in both contexts. You think that'll take care of it? It's better than nothing. I'll take it. The real question now is where do we even begin? Even though people say Shin is practically a remake of Gojira, the two don't really follow the same plot or story structure, so going point by point through them wouldn't really work. Well, you focused on the characters when you compared Shin to 2014. Why not start there? Good idea. We shall lead with the characters. To be honest, this isn't really a one-to-one comparison either. Gojira has a true ensemble cast, with multiple characters sharing the spotlight equally. Those characters are Hideto Ogata, Emiko Yamane, her father Dr. Kyohei Yamane, and Dr. Daisuke Sarazawa. Shin has a much larger cast than Gojira, but it also clearly has a main character in the form of Rando Yaguchi. Everyone else is secondary and tertiary. In order to make things a bit more even, we'll add some of the supporting cast to our analysis. We'll count the Prime Minister, or PM for short, the PM's aide Hideki Akasaka, Special Envoy Kayoko Ann Patterson, and Deputy Director Hiromi Ogashira. Hang on, what about Godzilla? And didn't you include more characters for Shin than Gojira? To answer your second question first, I did, but I know what I'm doing. To answer your first question second, Godzilla will be addressed at a later time. So let's amend this to be about the human characters specifically. One of the reasons I prefer the characters in Godzilla 2014 is because they feel well-rounded and as fleshed out as they can be for the circumstances presented. I feel that same assessment in general can be applied to Gojira. Ogata usually gets top billing among the human cast, so let's start with him.
Ogata is a character you can describe as an everyman. He's not a soldier, a scientist, or a politician. He's just an average Joe, or average Jiro to use a Japanese equivalent, doing his job as he usually would do, which is to investigate maritime incidents. It just so happens that the incident which kicks off the plot, the sinking of the Bingo Maru, is the start of something extraordinary.
Ogata's status as a normal dude might make him sound unimportant to the proceedings. Indeed, you can potentially summarize the entire plot of Gojira without even mentioning him once. And yet, that doesn't mean he's an unimportant character. In fact, he's vital to the story because he's the audience's entry point.
We start out by following him, and it is in doing this that we meet the Yamanes, and through them, Dr. Sarazawa.
That being said, Ogata is no mere audience surrogate.
Let us not forget that he is romantically involved with Emiko, but the romance is not simply for the sake of having a romantic subplot. This is somewhat of a forbidden love, since Emiko is seeing him despite being engaged to Sarazawa. Moreover, she hasn't broken up with Sarazawa yet.
There's a bit of a scandal at play here. Ogata is the other man with whom Emiko is cheating on Sarazawa, and I don't hesitate to use that term because they're keeping their relationship a secret from everyone.
Ogata doesn't really seem like a bad guy, but he's involved in something duplicitous. Yet despite that duplicity, we spend most of the film either hoping he winds up with Emiko or wondering if he'll do the right thing and step aside.
So even if he's not the most involved in terms of plot, he's still interesting to watch all the same. The obvious next character to look at would be Dr. Sarazawa. Now, I've said a lot about Dr. Sarazawa in other videos, so there's a chance I'll probably be repeating myself here, but he really does make this movie special.
Of all the characters, he is undeniably the most intriguing. He has a dark past in the war that not only physically scarred him, but also caused him to withdraw from society. He spends most of the film detached from the other characters, save for his fiancée Emiko, and even that connection is tenuous. His only desire is to use his scientific knowledge to come up with something that will benefit mankind, but instead he invented the oxygen destroyer, a devastating weapon to rival the H-bomb. This only causes him to withdraw even further to prevent it from escalating the Cold War.
Yet when faced with the prospect of using his unwanted invention to neutralize Godzilla, which is comparable to the choice America faced about using the nuclear bomb against Japan, he ultimately cannot say no, even if he initially resists.
However, to ensure that the oxygen destroyer is never used again, he burns his notes and sacrifices himself alongside Godzilla to ensure the knowledge never falls into anyone else's hands.
And it must be emphasized how different this was for the time.
Most creature features of the 50s didn't have characters like Sarazawa in them, because they never portrayed negative consequences for the science that conquers the monsters. The scientists were the heroes, so they got to live happily ever after. Sarazawa stands out among the rest because he was genuinely unique in the cinematic landscape. In some ways, he still is.
But Sarazawa isn't the only scientist in this movie, so it's only natural to go from him to Dr. Yamane.
It's somewhat unfortunate that Dr. Yamane tends to get overlooked while analyzing this film, as he's pretty interesting in his own right.
For example, Yamane is the first character to show dissatisfaction with the government's response to Godzilla.
He thinks that a military response, even if it's justified as self-defense, is a terrible idea. In Yamane's eyes, Godzilla is a scientific marvel, a being that should be studied, not destroyed. Yet he knows that he cannot persuade anyone to that line of thinking.
Well, maybe he can, but he doesn't. You see, much like Sarazawa, Yamane is also withdrawn, but in a different way. Rather than become a hermit, he simply remains silent. One gets the sense that he has a very specific role in this whole new system, and he feels powerless within it.
His powerlessness is emphasized after the return from Odo Island, where he presents his incredible findings about Godzilla, yet the discussion becomes a mudslinging contest as soon as he's done. See that face? That is not the face of a man with influence.
Ergo, he exacts influence where he's able to, in his domestic life.
This scene was excised from the American edit, but in the original cut, Ogata says that he's not opposed to the military response, and Yamane snaps at him and essentially bans him from the house. To make this extra awkward, the reason Ogata was there in the first place was to tell Yamane about his intentions with Emiko.
Of course, Yamane's not really angry at Ogata, but Ogata winds up taking the brunt of it anyway because Yamane has to assert his authority in some aspect of his life.
Yamane has his own tragedy separate from Sarazawa, for he is the one man everyone should have listened to, yet nobody did. With that in mind, it's no coincidence that he closes the film with a dire warning that Godzilla is not the last consequence mankind will face for splitting the atom.
It's also no coincidence that nobody seems to be listening, meaning his warning will go unheeded yet again. Even in the face of tragedy, some things just never change.
Last but certainly not least, we have Emiko, the lone woman in the primary cast. At first glance, you might think she serves the same purpose as every other token lady in a 50s sci-fi thriller, that of the love interest.
Heck, she's not even a reporter or a scientist like those other girls in the American movies. She's just an everyday woman.
Specifically, she's an everyday Japanese woman in the 50s, which means she has a very specific place in society, and it's not the same place as the men.
That's only at a glance, though. When you look closer, you'll see that Emiko has the best character arc in the whole darn movie.
For most of the film, Emiko knows her place and stays there. She is quiet, submissive, and never speaks unless spoken to. She's so reserved that you might worry she'll disappear in some scenes. Yet Emiko is put in a precarious position by the men around her.
If we were to assign dramatic Dungeons & Dragons style titles to each of these characters, Emiko would be the Keeper of Secrets. She interacts with all three of the male characters we've seen up to this point, and she's entrusted with information from each of them that she is not meant to share.
Ogata entrusts her with the secret of their love, which I suppose is technically a shared secret between them, and though they both intend to make their love known, they are always precluded from doing so. Then, of course, she is entrusted by Sarazawa with the secret of the oxygen destroyer, which she must never reveal to anyone for any reason. Later, her father shares his lamentations about Godzilla's treatment with her, and although this isn't specified as a secret she must keep, it's implied that she's meant to anyway because it's not her place to blab about it.
To her credit, she is really good at keeping those secrets, but everyone has their breaking point. Emiko's comes in the wake of Godzilla's final attack.
There's a lot to say about this particular sequence, but we'll have to save it for much later. Right now, the important detail is that Emiko volunteers to help with treating the survivors, and this brings her face to face with the devastation. The sight of families shattered and children left irradiated by Godzilla proves to be too much for her, and she breaks. She has to betray Sarazawa's trust, because there's a chance that his new weapon is the solution. This also winds up revealing to Sarazawa that Emiko has been two-timing him and intends to break up with him, though this was not an intended consequence.
The point, though, is that even though Sarazawa is the one with the solution, Emiko is the one on whom everything hinges.
After all, without her intervention, the oxygen destroyer likely would never get used, and Godzilla would never have been defeated.
In short, Emiko is the linchpin of the movie, and as a result, she's one of the best characters in the whole of 50s science fiction. I'd say I've established by now that Gojira has a very strong human cast, and that's just in the original version of the film. If I wanted to, I could also take a look at ace reporter Steve Martin from the American cut. And you know what? I think I will.
Steve Martin, no relation to the comedian, tends to get a bad rap for being an addition to the chopped-up American cut of Gojira. Midway through 2020, the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing was even commemorated by articles about how the message of the original film was quote-unquote whitewashed by America, which sparked a short wave of people tweeting as if that whitewashing was a current issue that needed fixing. That ignores the fact, of course, that Steve Martin's actor Raymond Burr was always an advocate of preserving the original message of Gojira, and that the film's alterations do not ultimately erase the original message. Besides, both cuts of the film are readily available these days anyway, so the message can be seen by anyone in any form at any time.
It was just another lame duck excuse for ideologues to make intersectional controversy where none existed to begin with. Anyway, that's beside the point. We're talking about the characters here.
So yes, Steve Martin was inserted into Gojira because it was thought his presence would make the film more accessible to American audiences of the 50s, but that doesn't mean he's a bad character. Steve Martin is cast as an outside observer, an American who might otherwise have not been involved in this whole affair, but who winds up bearing witness to it all the same.
The subtext of Gojira is how American nuclear testing is affecting the nation of Japan, and here we see an American forced to confront it head-on.
Awkward execution aside, Steve Martin's inclusion isn't whitewashing anything. Rather, his inclusion is similar to Ogata's inclusion, for he is the American audience's guide into seeing the Japanese perspective on nuclear weapons. The American edit of Gojira is certainly not as hard-hitting as the original edit, but it is still much harsher than other similar films of the era. It showed American audiences the effect these tests were having on a global scale and did so without erasing the original subtext. Thus, it opened the door for later American films to confront those subjects more directly. Whitewashing indeed.
Okay, that covers all of the major characters in Gojira, and good grief that took a while. Now it's time to move on to Shin, and if you're familiar with my channel, you may already know what I'm about to say, but there is going to be some new analysis added moving forward. So, let's dive in.
How does one describe the character of Rando Yakuchi?
That's not a rhetorical question, by the way. I genuinely am at a loss for what to say because we don't know that much about him.
We know that he works for the government, and for some reason he's the first person in the whole cabinet to take reports of a sea monster seriously. He also states that he got into politics because he likes the simplicity of its friend or foe structure, though this is in stark contrast to the entire point of the film, which clearly depicts the political landscape of Japan as so strangled by red tape that it was questioned after David Carradine's death.
I suppose Yakuchi's line could be meant as a joke, but it doesn't feel like it is.
Anyway, his laser-guided focus on his job is what drives him to lead the charge against Godzilla, and he does this because...
Really, that's it. We never get a reason for why he's doing any of this.
Even the possibility of his motive being political ambition is quickly snuffed every time it's brought up, as he suddenly becomes very reserved and disinterested when someone suggests he should be the next prime minister. We get no look into his personal life, if he even has one, and nothing ever provides us with insights as to who he really is.
Hideki Akasaka doesn't fare much better.
He's basically a second Yakuchi, just in a different position and with slightly less direct involvement. Most of the time he's there so Yakuchi has someone to talk to, and other times he's just another cog in the machine fulfilling his role. A role that could have been filled by any sort of character without really changing a thing.
Snazzy, I forgot why I included him as a primary. Well, he's counted as one on Wikipedia, and if you can't trust an online source that's subject to peer editing, who can you trust? Well, that was a waste of time. Guess we'll move on to the next major character to get introduced.
Hiromi Ogashira embodies a staple of Hideaki Anno's work by being a Rei Ayanami clone. She's stoic to the point of being almost robotic, but she's also very smart and important to the process.
So at least she does have a clear personality, but I'm not so sure it works here.
You often see stoic female characters like this in anime, the realm which Anno hails from, but the reason they work there is because these stoic characters are part of an ensemble filled with extravagant personalities.
Animation is a medium often defined by exaggeration, so having someone who is exaggeratedly emotionless works in a setting where she's surrounded by people who cover a wide range of exaggerated emotions.
In Shin, where most of the characters are already lacking in personality and emotion, an intentionally emotionless character stands out in a bad way. Hiromi feels like she belongs in an anime, not a live-action film.
Now, I'm not saying people like her don't exist, but for the purposes of a fictional movie, this part needed to be toned down or altered somehow for it to feel believable. Then we have the Prime Minister, or PM for short, though I personally call him the Straw Man.
It's obvious that the PM exists only to represent government incompetence. Believe me, it's no coincidence that his death midway through the film, along with the deaths of nearly the entire old guard of politicians, is also what finally allows the remaining cast to get stuff done.
I've always felt like this is unfair because we never see how he functions under normal circumstances. Ergo, how can we say he's incompetent or bad at dealing with crises when the crisis he's facing is completely unprecedented?
At one point, Yakuchi says that they had plenty of time to respond to Godzilla's first landing and they wasted all of it on meetings, but Akasaka says everyone did their best given the circumstances. We're probably meant to see that as an excuse, but I think it's a valid statement.
And again, the movie is ridiculously biased anyway. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, shall we? The point is that the PM is a caricature, not a proper character.
And I know what some of you are thinking. How is this movie's depiction of government incompetence any different than what the first movie showed?
Well, the first movie didn't devote most of its runtime to bureaucratic ineptitude, for starters.
Moreover, watching the meeting descend into chaos hits differently because Godzilla is already established as dangerous by that point, and the petty squabbling is truly pointless when there's real work to be done. That's different from showing people fumbling to respond in the moment to something totally unprecedented happening out of the blue.
The way I see it, the critique from 1954 holds way more water than the critique from 2016.
That leaves us with Kyoko Ann Patterson, the American Special Envoy. Again, I won't deny that she has a personality, even though said personality is basically a shallow American stereotype.
Unlike every other character in this film, we actually do learn a few things about her.
Specifically, we learn that unlike Yaguchi, she does have ambitions of leadership, for she wishes to become President of the United States one day. She is also in politics because she has a family name to uphold. The Pattersons seem to be somewhat of a political dynasty in this universe akin to the Kennedys, or at least that's what's implied.
So finally, a character we know something about. It's too bad that all of that information comes to us when the movie is practically over.
Yeah, all of that information I just conveyed to you isn't brought up once in the film until right before the grand finale, when it gets dumped on us all at once. Sure, it's better than nothing, but had it been introduced sooner, it might have improved on her attempted character arc.
Yes, like Emiko, Kyoko is supposed to have a character arc. But unlike Emiko, it doesn't go very well.
One gets the sense that she's not all that invested in these events beyond how it can further her own career. Then word comes down that America plans to nuke Godzilla while he's sleeping in the ruins of Tokyo, and suddenly she cares about the fate of Japan to the point that she's willing to risk that entire career to save it.
Why? Given what we've seen up to this point, why would she completely change her tune like that?
Sure, dropping nukes is a big deal, but Kyoko is acting like she's suddenly fallen in love with this land she's implied to have no real knowledge of beyond what her granny told her as a kid. Her character just completely changes over the course of one speech, like she had this whole journey of discovering her Japanese heritage off-screen, but we're only getting to see the end result.
But hey, since when do audiences need to actually see what the characters go through on their journeys? I mean, what is this, a movie or something? Clearly all we need is to know that the character has changed without having to see what caused that change. Gentlemen, I believe what Avengers Endgame really needs is a time skip.
So the gist I'm getting is that you think Shin has inferior characters to Gojira?
Pretty much. The grand irony, though, is that there actually is a very interesting character connected to Shin Godzilla. It's just that we never actually see him. I speak, of course, of Goromaki. Goromaki is in many ways the most important character in all of Shin Godzilla, because he is the instigator of the plot.
He's the guy who discovered Godzilla, cataloged all of the information about him, and is supposed to have somehow triggered Godzilla's initial attack.
He also has a clear motivation and is presented as a complex man.
Despite the implication that he made Godzilla attack, we know that he is not evil, but rather disillusioned. He lost his wife to a nuclear accident which the government failed to properly respond to, so he feels no love for the island nation that ruined his life. He provokes Godzilla, but also leaves his research to be found as a challenge for Japan to improve.
And we see none of that in the movie. It's all relegated to supplemental materials that aren't available internationally, and I guarantee you that only a few hardcore Japanese fans even bothered reading any of it. You know, I feel like if Anno really wanted to do an alternative Godzilla movie, he might have picked the wrong way to do it.
Imagine a movie just about Goromaki losing his wife to Fukushima, going into self-imposed exile on the high seas, discovering Godzilla, and becoming fascinated with him. Really, just picture it. He studies the creature, learns about it, and this man who is disillusioned with humanity suddenly discovers something he comes to see as a god.
It would have been a very intimate movie, with a disillusioned man alone discovering a god incarnate, and maybe eventually leading Godzilla back to Japan so it can exact whatever fate it deems fit. Yeah, that would have been pretty neat. Under the right conditions, of course.
Instead, Goromaki's entire character is relegated to a few scraps of paper and a couple of lines explaining his motives. That's it.
Good grief, I know Anno has a tendency to taunt his audience with mystery boxes, but this is ridiculous. We couldn't even get an impressionistic flashback or something? Come on, Anno, you weren't working with Gainax on this. You had a budget. You could have used it.
Then again, the counter-argument I so often hear is that people who critique Shin for its weak characters are looking at it all wrong. In reality, the main character is Japan itself. Each character is flat and one-dimensional because they are meant to collectively personify the nation of Japan. Why, even the original taglines for the film say it's about reality, Japan, versus fantasy, Godzilla.
Boy, do I have a lot to say about that, but most of it is best reserved for a later video. Right now, all I'm going to say is that is not an excuse. You can have characters represent nations and still have them be distinct individuals in their own right. Take Casablanca as an example.
Casablanca is one big allegorical retelling of how America got involved in World War II and why America's involvement is vital to winning. Rick clearly represents America, but this metaphor doesn't prevent him from having his own personal motivations and a character arc tailor-made just for him. Go check out the full review if you want to know more. There was no reason why Shin couldn't have done something similar, but the fact remains that it did not.
Unfortunately, I have to stop there before further analysis brings us into territory we're not yet ready to enter.
I would recommend taking a break anyway. You've been talking about this for a ridiculously long time.
Probably not a bad idea. Let me just wrap this up.
In conclusion, folks, Shin doesn't have very interesting characters, especially not when compared to the film it's supposed to be a spiritual remake of. Heck, even the American cut of Gojira has better characters than Shin.
Well, so far I would say Gojira is superior to Shin, but we're not yet done. Come back for part 2 because that's when we'll be looking at Godzilla himself. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. You know, the sad part is I can't rule out the possibility of Anno Inoguchi screwing up a Goromaki-centric film too. Then again, it is difficult to judge the quality of a movie that doesn't exist.
Thank you all for watching. If you want to see us keep doing what we're doing, you might consider doing all the usual YouTube things, as well as hopping down to the description to find links to DeviantArt, Patreon, Twitter, and links for the different books in the Tales from the Omnivault universe. Your support is naturally appreciated. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.